Welcome to the continuation of listening to God's story. Today we read 3 chapters. The book of Genesis, chapter 9, chapter 10, and chapter 11. And when being asked what is the most significant event that's described in these 3 chapters, your answer would be the Tower of Babel. Some pronounce it Babel, some pronounce it Babel. I checked different sources. So what would you like me to use? Babel or Babel? Babel. I think Babel is the traditional, right? No? Babel is better? Well, yeah. If we want to babble, let's use Babel. But Babel would probably be more in tune with the traditional. Anyhow, if you hear me use different versions, just know that I'm talking about the same thing, okay? So, the Tower of Babel is described within 9 verses of 11th chapter of the book of Genesis. Only 9 verses are dedicated to the material. But it is well known throughout the world and throughout history. There have been many paintings made, different renderings made of how it looked like and what it meant, what it signified. There are stories, there are phrases, there are idioms used about this tower that's engraved in language of many nations, many countries. We will be asking the biblical text about the basic meaning and basic message of these 9 verses. First, they describe to us what humans did, and then the text goes to describe what God did as a reaction. Genesis 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. Is there a difference between a language and a speech? What does the Bible describe to us? The language, in the original, literally, a word safa, which means a lip in singular. Typically, we would use the word lips in plural, right? A lip is rarely one. Usually it's 2. But when it's in the singular form, it means a spoken language. Let me give you an example. It's in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. It says, "For you are not sent to a people of unfamiliar speech." Speech is safa, literally a lip. "And of hard language, but to the house of Israel, not to many people of unfamiliar speech and a hard language, whose words you cannot understand." So, safa means a language. It's a synonym for another term in original, which is lashon. Lashon is a typical designation of a language. So they had one language, one for all people living at that time. That's clear. What is the meaning of the phrase, and I am using New King James Version, what's the meaning of the phrase that the whole earth had one speech? What does it mean? When we go to the original, we have a phrase, devarim achadim. Davar in the original is a word. Devarim is words. Achadim means identical, the same. So, It's not only that they used and spoke one common language that they all understood, they also chose specific words, identical words to use when they spoke. How could it be described? What does it mean? What does it mean that they had devarim achadim, the same words? The Bible talks about ideas, about philosophy, about thinking, about the way to express. They had a shared understanding, a shared worldview that was manifested in the same words. It could be illustrated like this. Can you determine which Christian denomination a person belongs to after talking to him or her for like half an hour? Can you determine? If you are talking about spiritual, biblical, church-related, religious stuff, are you able to determine the denomination that the person belongs to? I can do it even quicker than in 30 minutes. Because typically each denomination has its markers in terms of the vocabulary that they use. For example, if they greet you this way, it's typical of that denomination. If it's a different word that they use just to say hi, it would be a designation of a different denomination. So when talking about God, talking about prayer, talking about worshiping, typically each Christian subculture is different in the way that they express themselves. It is called a subculture. And each subculture has words that are typical. This is what we are talking about. One language, but within this one language, there are specific markers in terms of words, in terms of vocabulary, and they had it in common. So here we have a picture of population of the earth that is in unison. They think the same, they sound the same, they have the same phrases, they have the same slogans. Let me give you an illustration from my past. Some of you would easily recognize this. It goes like this. A slogan. Long live our court. The most humane court in the world. So this is a description of what Soviet Union judicial system looked like. So everyone believed that our courts are the most, what's the term? Humane. And this was a slogan that was repeated many times. And people really believed that if you take the capitalist countries, their judicial system is very harsh. Yeah. The people of Soviet Union, they sincerely believed that United States courts, they are terrible. But the Soviet Union courts, they are the most humane. And this phrase was repeated many times by different people. And these humane courts, they have dealt with many people and sentenced them to labor camps, to prisons, to death, just for believing that there is God, that God really exists. So the inhumane treatments by these courts was evident. There were many dissidents, many persecuted people, millions of them. But still the system and majority of people believed our courts are the most humane ones. Devarim ahadim, the same words. Slogans, speaking in prepared, pre-manufactured sentences that embody the worldview of those who speak within this system. This is what the Bible is describing to us. Not only one language, but the same identical phrases, identical words. They were united. Let's go to verse number 2. Genesis 11:2. It says, "And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there." Where is it? Where is the land of Shinar? What does the Bible tell us about its location? Let's go to Genesis 10, verse 10. Genesis 10:10. "And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, or Babylon, in the land of Shinar." So the land of Shinar, the plain of Shinar, is where old Babylon stood. And today its country is called Iraq. Iraq is the place where the Tower of Babel was built. This is the place that's called Mesopotamia, literally in between two rivers, which is Tigris and Euphrates. So this is the physical place, the geographical place that the Bible describes when talking about the Tower of Babel. I have always been wondering when exactly after the flood people began this project. Has any one of you studied this? When did they begin building the city of Babylon and the Tower of Babel? The Bible does give us enough information to go about to answer that question. And in the 10th chapter of the book of Genesis, I would like to read for you verses 6 through 10. Genesis 10, verses 6 through 10. "The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Raama, and Sabteha. And the sons of Raama were Sheba and Dedan. Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel in the land of Shinar." So, whose name do we have connected to this beginning of the Babylon civilization? His name is Nimrod. Nimrod. It says that the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon. And chapter 11 describes exactly this time in history when they moved, found this place called Shinar, and began building the city. The benefit of chapter 10, though, is that there is a genealogy there. And if you count the one generation after the other, it would show to you that it was in the second generation from the flood. Nimrod was the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham. And Ham, obviously, is one of the three sons of Noah. So Ham was the one who lived through the flood, and then first generation was Cush, and second generation was Nimrod. So the Tower of Babel began, the project began, the civilization began in the second generation after the flood. That's about the time. Now, it was very interesting for me to discover the meaning of the name Nimrod. In those times, names were given to signify something. Each name has a message. The meaning of Nimrod's name is literally, we shall rebel. Nimrod means we shall rebel, according to World Biblical Commentary, the top-notch professional scholarly commentary series on the whole Bible. We shall rebel. And then it says that he became to be a very mighty person on the earth. So he was a strong one, engaging people, gathering people around him, and influencing them to start building this city and this tower. Let's continue reading Genesis chapter 11, verse 3. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. So we see a technical revolution here. What was used to be used for building, according to the text? Stone, right? Stone is the very natural, sturdy material that people used. But it was replaced with bricks, something that people made up. When you go to Mesopotamia, to that place between Tigris and Euphrates, you really don't see any mountains, any rock there. Nothing solid. It's mostly clay in the ground. So when archaeologists began digging up these hills between the rivers, they discovered millions, literally millions and millions of bricks. Let's take a look at a couple of pictures. On the first one, in the upper left side corner, you see a well-known palace. Anyone knows whom it used to belong to? Saddam Hussein. Yeah, it's Saddam Hussein's palace, overlooking the place where old Babylon was built. So what do you see in the below there in the valley? Bricks. Bricks and bricks and bricks and bricks. Let's take a look at the second picture. Here you have it. This is the original, what archaeologists discovered in the mud, in the ground. So these are the bricks that are thousands and thousands years old. As you can see, they are very correctly shaped. They also have something that's, jumping at you. How do you call it? What do you see? In terms of art, what do you see? What is it? A voluminous object or description or picture. What is it? I know how it is in Russian, but I'm looking for the English word. I'm not asking what's depicted. A relief? Yeah, relief. Yeah, something that sticks out and makes a picture. Relief? So we have established it with two witnesses. Thank you so much. So it just shows you the level of craftsmanship of these people. So when the Bible says that instead of stone in that region, they began using bricks, and not just the ones that you lay, for the sun to heat, but they burnt them, right? Meaning that they used fire to strengthen the structure of these bricks. They baked them, the term is, right? this makes a very hard and sturdy and long-lasting material. So this is exactly what the Bible tells us. It matches with archaeological data. Let's take a look at the next picture. So these are the walls of the city of Babylon that were under the mud that archaeologists uncovered. The bricks are still there. And then it says that they used asphalt to join the bricks together. And this word is translated bitumen in other versions. So this is a substance that really glues things together. We still use it to cover roads, right? And hold the road coverings together. So this is what they did. Now let's go to verse number 4, Genesis 11:4. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." There is so much information in this short verse. First of all, a tower. A tower. When you look at the archaeological data, you immediately discover that there were many towers built in that region. It was a custom to build towers in that region. And the term that's used today to describe these towers is zikkurat. The accent on the first syllable, zikkurat. And it's taken from Babylonian zikkuratu, which means the highest point. So these are, let me give you a definition, zikkurat in ancient Mesopotamia, a rectangular stepped tower. Stepped means that there were layers, one after the other. What you see on the screen is one of the remains of a zikkurat. This specific one is in the city of Ur that's mentioned in the Bible. This is the actual structure that's still there. So this is only the first level. And typically there were at least three to seven levels of these stepped pyramids. So you could imagine how tall the structure was if it had 7 layers. So again, when we match biblical data with archaeological data, it matches perfectly, because indeed, in that region, towers were built on a constant basis. There are many remains of the ziggurats discovered by archaeological findings today. But this tower was built with a purpose. It says, lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth. So they say, let's build a city, let's build a tower, so that we would not be scattered or dispersed all over the world. And this is clearly a problem. Why? Because of Genesis 9:1. Genesis 9:1. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So what's the commandment? To spread around, to populate, to fill the earth. Not to congregate in one place, but to live out in the countryside, out in connection, in union with nature, live by families, live by small amounts of people. So these builders of the city and the tower, they said, we don't want to do that. We don't want to disperse. Rather, they want to stick together. And they built this tower so that they would not have compliance with the will of God. Do you remember the meaning of Nimrod? The meaning of his name? We shall rebel. And then when we look at the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of Hebrew Bible, we have this phrase, Nimrod was against the Lord. Literally, Nimrod was against the Lord. So God says to do this civilization wants to do the direct opposite. It was a rebellion against God's plan. They also said, let's make a name to ourselves. How would you interpret this? What does it mean to make a name? To make a name. To become famous, known for something. What is the core driving force to make a name for someone? When we trace the occurrence of this word, name, in the original of the text, it becomes clear that there has always been two different types of people in terms of name. You might remember when we read chapter 4 of Genesis that Cainites, the descendants of Cain, they were naming things, glorifying works of their hands. And the other genealogical line, the Sethites, they were using the same verbiage to describe something totally different. Let me remind it to you. It's Genesis 4:25. 4:25. It says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, for God has appointed another seed for me instead of Abel, whom Cain killed. Verse 26. And as for Seth, to him also a son was born, and he named him Enosh. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. So this term name is very significant. One group was calling on the name of the Lord, relying on Him, worshiping God, worshiping the Creator, and the other was worshiping themselves. Let's make a name for us to designate our accomplishments, to show our capabilities, to show our success and our development. So humanity becomes the norm, becomes the center. Humanistic ideology, humanism as a philosophy and a way of thinking was first demonstrated in that time, when a human person becomes the one to define everything. So your desires become the norm. Not what anyone else says, but what you feel. Let me ask the guys over there. Have you ever heard this phrase? Just be true to yourself. Have you heard this phrase? Have you heard this many times? Just be true to yourself. You may look like a woman, but you really are a man. Just be true to yourself. You want something and the society says that this is sinful, they are shaming you into doing something else, just be true to yourself. So when human and his or her desires and thinking and feelings become the norm, that's called humanism. That's what was there. Let's make a name for ourselves. Rather than calling on the name of the Lord and putting Him as a paradigm determiner, we will become the ones to determine. That's the essence of that civilization. We will make a name. Now, how about building a tower that would stretch to the heavens? Is it doable? Is it achievable? It depends on your definition of heavens. And we have already covered that, right? So, what is a heaven? Give me a definition of heaven. Where does heaven begin? From the ground up. Agree? So, if you're able to see my feet, I'm raising one of them, and my right foot is already in heaven, because it's in the air. So you see, even 2 inches above the ground is heaven already. The text doesn't give us dimensions, how tall the tower was. So what's the deal then? What is the significance of them wanting it to be stretching to the heavens? Unfortunately, we don't have time to deal with this in detail, so let me just summarize to you what the text says. What you need to do is find the word Shamayim in the original. In the context, Shamayim, of course, is heavens, right? You remember that. When you look at the usage of this word in the original, the last time you encounter it is when the windows of Shamayim opened. And what happened? The flood happened. So 3 times in the story of the flood, it says that the windows of heavens opened and water began pouring down for 40 days. The flood destroyed everything on the ground. When you have this context, you can start understanding the reason for them wanting to build a tower stretching to the heavens. They wanted to get to the place where those windows of heaven are, to secure them, to make sure that this tragedy, this annihilation of people will never happen again. They wanted to stretch and reach up to the heavenly realm, because there is where the danger is, according to them. To the unbeliever, to the one rejecting God and going against God, heavens represents danger. This is where the flood came from. So their desire is, let's summarize, to go against God, to go against expressly revealed will of God. Their desire is to secure themselves, to save themselves. They want to do nothing with God or His will, and they want to glorify themselves and become the norm, become a thing to and in themselves. It reminds a very well-known anthem that was created during the time of French Revolution. It's called the International. And here's a couple of lines. There are no supreme saviors. Of course, it's a translation from French into English. There are no supreme saviors, neither God, nor Caesar, nor tribune. Producers, meaning workers, let us save ourselves. decree the common salvation. So a person doesn't need God. He or she saves himself, herself. They are self-sufficient. This is the thinking and practice of the builders of Tower of Babel. Now, what was God's reaction? Genesis 11:5. Genesis 11:5 says, "But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built." We have a first instance of God's sarcasm in the text. What's the sarcasm? Remember, they are building the tower stretching to heavens, right? To get to the place where God is, to secure themselves and so forth. But in order for God to see the thing, he needs to do what? To go down. That's the laughing point. I don't hear any laughing. Okay, now I do. So the sarcasm is that the highest point that people could go up to is the thing that God needs to come down to even see it. Of course, God is everywhere. This is an anthropomorphism, literally device used. But the text wants to show that any of the accomplishments that human could have in God's sight, if the accomplishment goes against God's will, this is nothing even to look at. And funny enough, God is coming down twice, in verse 5 and then in verse 7 again. So he needs to come down twice to even, be on the same level as these great builders are. And of course, God confuses their language, and he scatters them across the face of the earth. So his original plan is fulfilled. And comparing chapter 10 and chapter 11 of Genesis, we know for sure when this thing happened, when the language was confused, when the Tower of Babel was interrupted. The process of building was interrupted. You could read it for yourself. It's in Genesis chapter 10, verses 22 through 25. Verse 25 says, "To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg. For in his days the earth was divided." And Peleg is the fourth generation from the flood. He was born in year 101 after the flood. So the beginning of building the city and the tower was in which generation? In the second generation, at the time of Nimrod. And they built it for 2 generations. And then it was interrupted by the confusion of the language in the 4th generation. So Peleg, he was born in 101 after the flood, and he died in the year 341. He lived for 443 years. During that time, people tried to accomplish this project. When we were reading this story and trying to analyze it and to comprehend, I saw, as they say, light bulbs coming on in your eyes. When you identified with something in that story that has a relevance to you. So, because of the lack of time, I won't be going through the list of very important lessons that are present in the text. I will just end with this. Babylon will again become a thing. The book of Revelation says that there is a modern day Babylon as the system of thinking, achievement, and going against God. And the same way as that generation, people of that generation wanted to build something up to the sky, in the skies, the same way Revelation chapter 18, verse 4 says that its sins, the Babylon's sins, went up to the sky. Identical words are used. And therefore there is a call, come out, my people, come out of Babylon. Don't participate in those sins. Don't associate yourself with those people. That's God's story, the Tower of Babel. Amen.